companions.
Shall explode.
It's his motherfucker.
King Kong.
King Kong.
Kong.
No, we have
Did
gravitated.
King Kong ever fight a giant serpent?
No, not yet.
Godzilla certainly has.
Fuck
There's
you know.
at least 40 movies of Godzilla. I'm sure that he's taken on just a massive big snake at one point.
Yeah, he's definitely had to. I mean, he's taken on like multi-headed like reptile beings, right? So surely some of that counts as snakery.
Pterodactyls.
I didn't realize Godzilla is like, I think it's called a kaiju, right? And apparently there's like loads of these in Japan. It's not just Godzilla, but like Godzilla's the one you know about.
Yeah.
Like kaiju is the genre. I think it's giant movie monster genre. You got Gamera, the big turtle, which fires shit out of its shell. It's a bit like Blastoise, really. Gamera is Blastoise, but green a long time before the event.
So Godzilla is what? Snorlax?
No. Godzilla's Godzilla. What are you going to do? It's just a one-off.
It's a bit of a cop-out, I think.
Anyway, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. If you're guessing at the reptilian theme, that is because we've got a very slithery special just about to unload on you.
This motherfuckers.
This is the great snake catastrophe of 2020.
Yeah, well.
Also known as Ajay's on a plane.
I think catastrophe is the perfect way to describe it, actually. Well done. Very apt as usual, Poet Laureate.
May I also get a little disclaimer in there to our lovely audience back home? Would like to say welcome to the Red Onion again, you beautiful people. We've missed you in our coiled serpentine grasp, and ultimately, there's been a weird phenomena that's occurred over the last couple of years, where everyone that knows me seems to call me a snake, a serpent beast, a slithery creature for some reason or the other. And like, it really clashes with my kind and gentle spirit. So may I request that for the entire duration of this podcast, there's no references to me being serpentine in any way, shape, or form whatsoever. And that includes lizard-like. So can I get an approval from my two co-hosts?
I don't think either me or Eddie can guarantee that. Also, listener, this is also the point to remember how important the comment section really is. Please send in your messages and your all of your stories of Ajay being a complete serpent. We'd love to hear them. Backdated to 2013, September, obviously.
I mean, even before then, I think this has been an epidemic throughout his life.
Yes,
can I just add there's something I'd like to add on that. So I lived with you, Ajay, for quite a few years now. And I do recall going to pick up our housing contracts one year, and you requested that yours be in Parseltongue. So, I mean...
Yeah, but dude, you also signed an NDA, so I feel like we'll have to get this bit cut off unless you want billions of dollars taken from your personal account. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, Eddie is the heir to what was the figure? 1.9 billion Great British pounds, I believe it was. So please sue away.
Monster energy.
So today on the dining list of the Red Onion, we have some truly repulsive reptilian activity, beginning with the snakes of time, going all the way through to the snakes of your worst dreams and fiction. Also ending up roundabout via a point of snake news, and we will obviously never forget Scumming of the Week. In between there, we will also talk about snakes' representations in media, why they don't have a greater output in film. And I think, gentlemen, we are going to start with the snakes of time today. We're going to talk about historical snakes, the great historical snakes. I'm in charge in this section, so I would just like to let you all know at home of my criteria, what I had in mind when I started this segment. So for the historical snakes of time, I have not actually picked any genuine serpents. This is purely about people through history who have exhibited very snakish tendencies. The biggest offenders of snakish behavior from before the Roman times to, let's say, the 21st century, and everything in between. So, when you're judging snakish behavior in human beings, really, to snake someone is to betray them. It's to be a traitor to your friends, your family, and sometimes even your country. So these are my list of 3 biggest snakes in human history. So just as a little honourable mention, I'm sure half the audience here has seen the movie 300 and is well aware of the Spartans' Battle of Thermopylae and of the hunchbacked Ephialtes of Trachis, who, because he was not included in the 300 men who defended the narrow strait against the Persian army, betrayed that said army led by King Leonidas to Xerxes, the Persian emperor. That man did exist. He didn't have a hunchback, but he very much did exist, and he did show the Persian army the trail around the tracking cliffs that exposed the hot gates and doomed the Spartans to an admittedly glorious end. So I had to feel like he got a little honourable mention of biggest snakes of all time, because he sold out the martyrs of probably the greatest and most famous conflict in human history, one-off battle.
That's really interesting. I didn't actually know he was a real person,
Yes.
And I think the way
neither did I.
The way he was presented in the film, I guess probably also in the graphic novel, which is like, this, not saying hunchback's necessarily a grotesque, but he's clearly not an attractive man.
Was that Zack Snyder being hunchist?
Maybe hunchist is a thing, but he had quite a few other physical deformities.
Why did he need to be a hunchback? Because he clearly wasn't in history. Why did Zack Snyder choose to make that character a hunchback in the film?
Well, I don't know, because it was based off the graphic novel, wasn't it? I don't know if that was a decision there.
Was he like that in the graphic novel?
I don't know.
Here, ladies and gentlemen, we reveal mine particularly, but all of our thorough lack of preparation in order to give you the greatest spontaneous show known to man these days on your trusted YouTube. Anyway, leading on to number 3 on our list of the biggest historical snakes. This is one of 2 men on the list who managed to sell out their entire country. I'm going to go with Wang Jingwei.
Good choice.
Wang Jingwei was a Chinese politician, slightly left of center, in the time of the Chinese Civil War, when Chiang Kai-shek was the head of state at that particular time. And that parliament had to manage a civil war with the communist faction, obviously led by Mao Zedong. Now, in the midst of all this, this is a precursor to the Sino-Japanese War, which was absolutely devastating in effect, and we can't even get started on the sheer list of crimes against humanity, which that entails. It would take an entire episode to discuss it. But in a nutshell, Wang Jingwei basically sold out China to the Japanese in this particular instance. He, compared to everybody else in the Chinese parliament at that particular time, all the leading candidates, his was always the most apathetic and depressive view of war with Japan. Perhaps rightly in some contexts. China was vastly under-equipped to deal with the Japanese in a full-scale invasion, as it showed, and particularly since the country was split in two by a civil war as they were invading. And yet, it's difficult, because calling him the biggest snake in history, definitely justified, as we will go on to explain later. But always has to be mitigated by this idea of what would you do in that situation. The Japanese are coming at you with an incredibly marshaled and deadly army, and you know that your country cannot do anything to stop them at that particular time. Now, because China was at war and has at least 3 factions all pulling it in different directions within its own body politic, unlike Soviet Russia at that time, led by one of the most evil dictators of all time, who were fully equipped to engage in a total war style of conflict with Germany in the separate theatre of war, and within time would be able to develop their own, update their own weaponry and armory. China was not in a position to do that. So there is a certain that's why he's number 3. He's not quite number 2 or number 1. There has to be a certain allowance for the fact that China was completely unequipped to deal with the Japanese. At the same time, the result of what happened because of that invasion, the rape of Nanking, Unit 51, all these things, also because Wang Jingwei was so praising of this invading conquering Japanese force, and basically praised the idea of Chinese submission at that time. Really, then, like, you know, just makes it sting all the more. The heels of that war have never truly healed, and probably never will. So, needless to say, he is regarded as a monstrous traitor by the whole of his country. And in fact, when the Chinese forces recaptured Nanking, his tomb and body were destroyed and replaced by a pavilion, eternally marking him as a traitor for the rest of time. Pretty significant.
Wow.
Yeah, well deserved. I mean, it's pretty horrific things. I mean, you could maybe argue they were going to happen anyway, but he definitely facilitated them.
Yes.
And I think to do that to what are essentially your kinsmen.
This is like
not that I feel particular affinity to other English people, but I mean,
this is if basically Neville Chamberlain, instead of resigning, had stayed on in power and sold out Winston Churchill and invited the Nazis into Britain. I'd encourage you to imagine a potential alternative history if that happened. It is.
I mean,
that.
I mean, the knockoff's significant as well, because I mean, I know Chinese-Japanese relationships still to this day can be a bit frosty sometimes. Like they talk to each other, but I mean, they're still, because Japan can't. So this is an interesting fact that I know, actually. So the rape of Nanking isn't been acknowledged by Japan, and still hasn't to this day, because the commander of the Japanese forces was the emperor's son. And in Japanese law, the royal family can't be guilty of a crime. So if Japan acknowledges the rape of Nanking, then they're admitting that a member of the royal family committed a crime, which they're not allowed to do. So Japan won't apologize for it. They just pretend it doesn't happen. It's like Turkey and the Armenian genocide.
Exactly.
Well, no, I mean, in many ways, it's like kind of worse, because Japan just pretends it doesn't happen. Turkey just like denies it and says, well, it's technically not a genocide. I have another interesting fact about the Armenian genocide, but maybe this is getting a bit dark.
I think this, and also it's tangenting from the individuals themselves. So that is why Wang Jingwei is number 3 on my biggest snakes in history. Now, where do you go from that? I guess, how do you do worse than selling out your country to an unreasonable, menacing, destructive force, which destroys your own country in such a short space of time? I think the only way you top that is if, in the latter stages of your life, you make a decision which sells out your nation for the next 150 years. And that is exactly what Mir Jafar did in India, by in particularly the Bengal area, where he started out as a militaristic general for hire, working under the Nawab of Bengal. Mir Jafar would go on to usurp that role with the backing of the East India Company and help usher in British rule into India for the very first time. This was started in 1757. Obviously, separation didn't happen until the like halfway into the 20th century. So that is at least, but almost 200 years of repression and appropriation of wealth and colonization, effectively, all down to the selfish actions of one man who wanted a bit more power in his environment at that particular time. For 10 years of his life, and then he passed away. He became the Nawab of Bengal, but he sold out his country for the rest of history. Now, one potential mitigating factor is, in this instance, I'm sure the East India Company and other big European trading heavyweights were probably hovering around individuals like these, seeing who they could back, seeing who they could tap up and get their man in there and start to get their tentacles in. So in one sense, Mir Jafar could have been anyone, but it was him. He did sell out his country for the next 150 years, and he didn't have to pay anything close to the cost for it. So he is very lucky number 2.
Wow.
No, that's a good point, actually, there. When you say it could have been anyone, really, because I remember this being part of the discussion earlier this summer when people were talking about, reparations as part of the Black Lives Matter movement. And then there was, I mean, it's valid, like most of these people were just abducted and stolen, right, from the west coast of Africa. But there were tribes that sold out other tribes, like they would capture, they would go raid a tribe, they would basically imprison them and then sell them off because that was worth money, and then they'd get wealth themselves for it. Which in many ways, like you can argue it's a smaller scale thing of what this guy did in India, but I mean, it's still pretty horrific, right? To sell out your neighbor like that.
Oh my
So,
God.
I mean, there's always opportunists, people greedy.
Yes, he's not
crave
ultimately
instant
the
wealth
ultimate
and
evil
power.
force in this story. That, of course, was British colonial presence in India, but he was the gateway into that happening. And that's what makes him more of a snake. Remember, this is about snaky human beings. What is more snaky than that, to sell out your brotherhood, your sisterhood, your entire nation for your own personal power for a finite amount of time? It's like not giving a shit about climate change because you know you're in a certain generation where you're going to be dead before you actually see the effects of it.
Yeah, 100%. Looking at you, Rupert Murdoch, piece of shit.
I knew right wingers would definitely come up. I was just waiting. I just didn't know when.
I thought it was going to be Scummy of the Week again, but regardless.
Now, as a little precursor to my number one, I will just mention that none other than Adolf Hitler described his betrayal by Heinrich Himmler in 1945 to be the most monstrous betrayal in history. He was pretty adamant about that point. I think he slightly mispronunciated it and said, I think the original transcription was meant to be, it was the betrayal featuring the two most monstrous individuals in human history. But he was not at that point capable of self-reflection, regrettably. And moving on to number one, the biggest snake in history. I did think about this. I'm slightly annoyed at myself because of it, because it's slight English bias in terms of how rammed into my brain and everybody's brain in this country that this snake is. And there's a huge argument about, well, no, he's not really a snake. This is what we always hear. It's not true. But I have to say, Richard III of England, the last Plantagenet king, the last Yorkist king, the king whose death would finish off the Wars of the Roses. I mean, this all hinges upon the fact that Richard III, as Richard Duke of Gloucester, before he was made Richard III, was the most loyal, strong arm to his brother that there could possibly be. Those two went through everything. They fought so many battles. They fought so many battles to win the throne in the first place for Edward, and then yet more battles where they had to reclaim the throne after getting kicked out of England by Warwick the Kingmaker and the return of Queen Margaret. Had to evacuate to Belgium and then come back raging with an even bigger force. They were thick and thin. This was his best man. And within a year of Edward IV's death, we can only presume, there's very, very little evidence to state otherwise, that Richard III murdered both of his brother's sons in order to take over the throne of England. It's very hard to look past that. And obviously there's a lot of circumstances leading up to that moment which would rationalize Richard's decisions in that moment. Richard was loyal to his own family, the Duke of York. He was not and did not need to be loyal to Edward IV's close family and the Queen's family of the Woodvilles, who were a family because of Lady Elizabeth Woodville's marriage to Edward IV, became incredibly powerful at court and were effectively the nouveau riche at court at that particular time, shunning out and putting aside the previous aristocracy which was there, which included mostly the Nevilles and other members of the House of York, Richard being one. So there's no reason for him to be loyal to the Queen or their family after the death of his brother. He was in full rights to assume rule of protect realm, which Edward IV had given him on his deathbed, and look after his two sons, preparing them to be eventual kings in a very, very short space of time. And this isn't due to propaganda, this is just fact. In about 3 months, he reneged on that. He had claimed that the two sons were born out of wedlock and they were therefore bastards, taken the throne for himself, and for good measure, killed them. Because, I'm sorry, they were locked in the Tower of London. He was the King of England. He had absolute security of that building. No one else got in there. It had to be him. And when you say it like
someone
that,
he had hired, right?
No, probably they think it was him. Laurie, that was an excellent telling, by the way. Nice history degree. I've been to the Tower of London, and if you go round, if you pay to get in, can do free tours. And one of the things they talk about is this, because it happened at the top of the tower. They were like staying there. How old were they at the time? I think they were 11 and 8, weren't they?
11, I think it was 9 and 12.
9 and 12. Oh, could be close.
Maybe 8.
9 and 12, yeah. And apparently, so what they think is he just went in and just smothered them to death with a pillow.
Yeah.
And it's just like, they're fucking kids, man. Like, Jesus Christ.
And
killing 2 kids in cold blood just because you want the throne. Like, fair enough, it's the throne, but like, fucking hell.
And that imagery lasts down through years. I think it's a particularly sensitive issue in England, the killing of children. We've seen it in Game of Thrones. Whenever you see those 2 boys that Theon Greyjoy burned, the farmer's sons, 2 little boys dead. Yeah. It's a strong recurring imagery through fiction afterwards. It's particularly powerful. It's monstrous. And really, this is what makes Richard III the absolute snake. Because even if he didn't do it, and it's very doubtful that he didn't, it's this whole aura of cloak and dagger, stealthy government in this last very dark period of the Wars and the Roses, which completes this mystique of a schemer and a serpent. And obviously Shakespeare and Henry Tudor before him milked that for all the potential propaganda, instituting their dynastic succession as fact for all it was worth. But it's very hard to get away from the actual evidence. And the fact that the evidence itself is so shrouded in mystery just enhances his reputation as a snake.
Of course, because I mean, who can hide stuff better than the royal family?
Yeah.
Looking at you, Prince Andrew.
Thus concludes, listeners. I hope you enjoy it. Though that is my account of the biggest snakes in history. Number 3, Wing Jiang Wei. Number 2, Mer Jafar. And number 1, Richard III. Obviously, number 1's crimes are probably nowhere near as significant as the last 2. But this is about the person. These are about the personalities as much as they are the crimes. And for me, Richard III, until someone else comes along, is just the snakiest figure I can think of in history, straight off the bat. So there he is.
Cool. That was excellent. Very historical. I think we both enjoyed that. Me and Ajay. Let me translate into parcel tongue for you, Ajay.
Thanks, Eds. Okay, dude, I'm not gonna lie, I've been sitting here for the last like 15 minutes trying to figure out what you've been saying, Laurie. So lots of technical jargon in there, but thanks for translating, Eds.
No worries. Sliver.
Well, I hope you enjoyed your.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've now entered the next segment of this particular podcast. I understand that a lot of you may have been missing the sound of my voice right now, but hey, sometimes it's good to take a back seat and let your friends take the spotlight. You know, even if your expertise might be better than theirs, because it's always good to share and shit. But basically,
coming to you summer 2021.
Wow. You know, my mom tells me that I do this weird thing where I only hear what I want to hear, and I don't really know what that's about. But anyway, like, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take you to the next segment of this show. We're actually going to discuss the scariest snakes ever. Well, the scariest snakes alive right now.
So the real snakes.
Doesn't come into the real physical, material, biology-based snakes of El Planeta Eartho. We might mention a couple of the onion serpents till toward the end of this, but yeah, let's get on with this. So, ladies and gentlemen, despite all the insults and insinuations about me shedding my skin once every couple of months, I am actually terrified of snakes. I mean, I grew up in a distant land called Sri Lancashire, and snakes run amok there. They run wild. They basically run the show on so many different levels, and as a result, I'd like to share with you the snakes that I think are the most terrifying out there. I'm going to start off with an honorable mention and a tiny tale for you, because this honorable mention isn't objectively, I don't think, the scariest snake alive. However, it's got personal relevance to me. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to close your eyes, take a deep breath in, and imagine distant, lush, mountainous hills, okay? So I'm talking dense tropical rainforest and really high bumpities in the ground. And now imagine a group of about 6 children, including a young RJ, all below the age of 11, sent across with a random guide to traverse one.
Rosie, stop bullying Minnie. Sorry.
Rosie.
I can see him. She knows what she's doing. Sorry, Ajay, please continue with your.
No.
No,
I'm
going to have to take you out. I'm sorry, you can't do that.
Sorry,
we should actually keep that in.
We've actually been taken hostage by a couple of guinea pigs. If you guys can send help as soon as possible, really, preferably no police, because that's probably not going to help me.
I'm not going to lie. I don't, like, I'm happy to bend the knee to these two. I mean, I know Rosie's a bit of a dick, but Minnie's pretty chill.
She's a very naughty hog. So back to our...
Should I continue?
Back to
we can
our
edit stuff, right? It's fine.
Third scariest snake.
So a group of children, all under the age of 10, whilst on holiday with our parents, were sent away for about half a day with this random guide to traverse this mountain, right? So the mountain was called Kandalama Rock, which is kind of in central Sri Lanka. And when I say mountain, it wasn't like a particularly tall mountain, but it's covered in dense canopy. I mean, what's the ground layer of a rainforest called again? All the dead leaves and shit. Like, you know, our shoes at the very least.
I don't know.
Cool,
is it just Vitis? I don't know. Maybe it's not.
Either way, as long as people know what I'm talking about. And basically, you know, the dead leaves and dirt and stuff was coming up to our little ankles, right? So all the kids run into this rainforest, like clutching onto large sticks, super excited to go, like, you know, fight their way through it. But then, but yeah, ultimately, by the time we got about 100 to 200 meters in, everyone's shitting themselves, right? Because you suddenly realize you're in this dense rainforest, your parents aren't around, you can hear like animals kind of cawing around you. And yeah, it's exciting, but it's also scary because like you don't know where your feet are stepping. So every like few minutes, someone would call out snake, and it would just turn out to be a mangled bit of bark. Someone would turn around and scream snake, but it would just be a vine that would like drop down, right? This kept happening. So even though we were all freaked out, it was kind of desensitizing us to it, right? Cut to, we eventually reach a little clearing in the forest. And there's a flat rock there where people, you know, where you could probably just sit down and have a drink, which is exactly what we did. So the guide was like, all right, kids, rest your sweet little butt cheeks on there, and then we're going to continue on up to the top of the mountain. As I was about to sit down, and take a swig of my water bottle, my friend screams, snake, in a really shrill, high-pitched voice. Now, I remember thinking at the time, this guy's fucking with me, yo. This little, like, 8-year-old piece of shit is, like, completely screwing with me. But due to the fact that we were on edge, I still jumped. And, like, when I jumped and flipped around, sitting there waiting to strike was the Russels Viper. Now, for those of you that don't know, a Russels Viper is probably the deadliest snake in Sri Lanka, one of the deadliest snakes in Asia. At the time, there was no antivenom for it. If there was, I would have been dead by the time I got to the bottom of the mountain. Up until that point, I actually loved snakes, and that experience triggered something subconscious within me that's now made me feel kind of weird around them. So nothing happened, thankfully, but like, yeah, the Russels Viper is my personal, totally subjective answer to that question. But moving on. So for what I think the actual scariest snake of all time is, again, there's two, right? There's one genus which is more based on aesthetic, and there's one that I believe is genuinely the scariest snake around. So what I'm going to technically say is number 2 is the king cobra / the spitting cobra. And they're both tied in for different reasons, right? The king cobra can grow up to fucking massive lengths, especially as you get further and further away from human contact. I mean, king cobras, particularly in southern India, can grow to vast sizes, and when they basically stand up, they can almost reach human height. They can almost reach a human's height, right? And I mean, that's terrifying. They've got terrifyingly devilish faces. Something about the hoods just make them even more unnerving. And their venom's incredibly fucking deadly. And I think they're terrifying. Spitting cobras, I think, are a little less aesthetically scary than king cobras, but of course, being blinded by their venom and then killed by them is a pretty fucking terrifying ordeal. So they come in at number 2. Ultimately, they weren't my number 1 for one key reason, and that's because cobras are actually quite shy. They don't really fuck with people unless they're threatened, even though they'd have no issue doing so if they were threatened. And that segues nicely into my number 1, the black mamba. It may seem like quite an obvious choice, but I mean, the black mamba is the king of deadly snakes for a reason, right? So for people who don't really know, black mamba isn't actually called a black mamba because it's a black snake. Its coloring is usually like light, somewhere between like light to dark gray with kind of mixed in with white depending on the individual creature. The reason why it's called a black mamba is because the entire inside of its mouth is black, right? And it's actually, apart from its own fangs, it's actually got sharp teeth as well. So it's already like quite a freaky deaky looking snake. But then what really sets the black mamba out is its aggression. So the black mamba is one of the only snakes in the world, the black mamba is the only snake in the world that will actually chase and hunt down larger prey, including humans, for fun. So there's so many tales of safari jeeps riding through the wilderness and black mambas just suddenly jumping in their window through trees. People encounter black mambas and literally have to run for their lives because they will continue chasing them for no reason, apart from just killing them for sport. They're violent, they're aggressive, their venom is insanely deadly. It's not as deadly as the venom of, say, the inland taipan, which can kill a human in under an hour, but black mamba venom will still kill you. Yeah, you never, the inland taipans never killed a human, right? But black mambas are a snake you definitely want to fuck with. They've got everything. They've got the sneakiness, the agility, the deadly venom, and they kill for fun. So that has to be my top pick. Even though personally, I would find looking at a king cobra so much more terrifying, because fuck that. But yeah, hope you enjoyed that. And please, I mean, if the two of you have any suggestions for what you think your own scary snake would be, please do let me know.
I've only ever lived in the UK, so I've seen an adder once, and I've seen a grass snake once, and I thought they were weird because the way they look like they're wriggling, and they're like fast worms. They look like fast worms. Obviously, the coloring's different, but there's never even an adder's poisonous. But I mean, I don't want to do anything to you. Do you know what I mean? Like if a grass snake bites you, it might hurt. You might get a bruise, but not much else. So I've never really had this kind of fear of snakes. But the idea of a cobra just turning around, I'm just chilling. Let's say I've gone backpacking around, I don't know, India or something. And then I'm sitting there eating my lunch. And then I turn, and then there's just a cobra slithering between the rocks. And you just see its hooded head stick out and its tongue's licking the air. I would shit myself, 100%. No question about it. I'd run the other way. Right.
I mean, definitely the venomous snakes are always the most dangerous, and the more aggressive and big and quick the venomous snake, the scarier it is. I would always have to, and I'm sure we're going to mention it again on this podcast later, but I would have to put as a mention the anaconda, just to show the alternative side to how scary snakes can be, its strength. The fact that I think, much like a crocodile, you don't really see it until it's wrapped itself around you. And I've always said, I think, other than being a kid who got swallowed by a giant catfish, I think the worst way I could conceive to go would be getting killed by an anaconda, getting crushed by it, and then suddenly you realize this head is just swallowing you up and there's nothing you can do about it. So I'd definitely have to put that in there.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I'm really glad that you mentioned the constrictors, because they are fucking terrifying. And yeah, there have been cases of them eating children and so on. And I think that anacondas are horrible. Anacondas, boas, reticulated pythons, but I think the anaconda definitely takes the cake for the scariest.
It's got the catchiest name, and
it does. I also think it's just the whole idea that it resides in the Amazon, right? Where which is a beautiful but ultimately a pretty fucking dangerous place to be in. So
it's the idea of the unseen, and then you're enveloped by this terrifying thing that you thought might have been a lot of branches or a log.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, that was the Scariest Snakes.
That was the Scariest Snakes. And that was also the first half of this podcast. It's a long one. Much like the topic, it is long, uneven and spasming. So for the good of everyone, we decided to divide it up into 2 parts, the next of which will be coming very soon. Sayonara.
Just stay your normal voice, Ralph.
Okay, but
so many identities to me.
The Red Onion, an effervescent look at a deflated world, was recorded by Laurie Briggs, Ajay Gnanam and Eddie Landon, and is a silly enterprise you've wasted an hour of your life listening to. Don't be disappointed, you can waste it all over again next Saturday when we discuss a fresh new topic.